Jamahal Hill versus Carlos Ulberg was announced earlier today. It is officially the UFC 303 co-main event. Alberg is replacing Khalil Roundtree, who recently failed a drug test and was pulled from the fight. He's stepping in to fight Jamahal Hill after a pretty sensational win against Alonzo Menafield a couple weeks ago, and I absolutely love this matchup. Personally, I think this is more exciting than the Hill versus Roundtree fight. So on today's video, I'm going to give my thoughts and reaction to the matchup, as well as my early prediction, and even discuss what I think at stake here for the winner. And then towards the end, I'm going to talk UFC 303, and I'm going to give my early thoughts on how I think the card's shaping up. So make sure you guys smash the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Carlos Ulberg is on a roll right now. He has won 6 fights in a row and has 5 straight finish wins. Now, granted, he hasn't gone out there and been taking out elite tier opposition, but he did destroy Alonzo Menafield. He did choke out Dao Un Jung, who's a decent fighter. And I think he's showing improvement consistently in his fights. Whereas Jamahal Hill on the opposite front recently was dusted by Alex Pereira at UFC 300 in the first round, brutally knocked out. And prior to that, he hadn't fought since January of 2023, and he suffered a massive Achilles injury, which could potentially be career-changing. We've only seen 2 minutes or so of Jamahal Hill since that injury, and it resulted in him being quickly KO'd by Alex Pereira and not really showing any effective offense. So he could be a significantly diminished fighter since that point. Now, this fight, in my opinion, is harder for Jamahal Hill than Khalil Roundtree was. I know Roundtree has devastating knockout power, but there was an argument that Jamahal Hill was technically a little bit better in the stand-up, specifically with the boxing, less so with the lower half, but also with the hand speed and him being a tricky southpaw. But dealing with the side of Alberg, you have a former pro kickboxer, a city kickboxing fighter, somebody that's trained alongside Israel Adesanya for an extended period of time. There is a master of kickboxing that's going to be inside of the cage fighting against Jamahal Hill, who also is 6'4". Now, granted, there is a 2-inch reach advantage towards Hill, but I think Alberg uses range significantly better than Jamahal Hill. So we have Hill being KO'd recently. That in itself is worrisome. On top of that, you have him going on a tirade of excuses for his loss against Alex Pereira, as opposed to saying he caught me on an off night or he caught me with a perfect punch. He was the better man. Then a lot of the time he's making excuses for why it didn't go down, like Herb Dean intervening, like saying he wasn't even knocked out. These are bad looks in my opinion. Another factor is the chin could be deteriorated after a fighter is KO'd. There's a possibility that he doesn't come back the same, and then making a relatively quick turnaround to take on another dangerous kickboxer, it's seeming like a recipe for disaster. He lost to a tall kickboxer in Alex Pereira with a massive left hook. He's fighting Carlos Ulberg, who has a big left hook, who's also a tall kickboxer, 6'4". This all sounds like trouble for Jamahal Hill. Now, to talk a little bit about Alberg and not just shaft Jamahal Hill, he's simply better technically. He has a kickboxing background, has fought as a professional in kickboxing, has legitimate KO power, has shown improvement and promise as an MMA fighter. Obviously, the left hook is a massive punch. He's coming off of a very quick win against Alonzo Menafield, and Menafield fought that fight like a moron, blitzing him crazy, and he killed him. He chinned him. Big shot, 1, boom, 2 shots, really, and put him out. I think that this is a bad idea for Jamahal Hill. And I know that Hill has the mentality, I'm going to be champion again. This is my weight class. I have X, Y, and Z going for me. And he has confidence in himself, which is something that led him to the world title belt. But he beat Glover Teixeira for the belt over 5 rounds, who is not to the technical capabilities in the stand-up of Carlos Ulberg. He obviously tore his Achilles, and on top of everything, I think Jamahal Hill's striking prowess is slightly overrated. I think he has knockout power, but he's not a devastating one-shot knockout artist. Now, he knocked out Johnny Walker with a perfectly placed punch. He beat Thiago Santos by knockouts. He has KOs on the resume. I'm not saying he doesn't have power, but I don't think it's a one-touch magical thud. When you have a guy with kickboxing experience on the opposite front in Carlos Ulberg, I just think it's a bad recipe. Hill lacks footwork. This is a major problem. He crosses his feet. He's awkward with his footwork. It's definitely one of his weaker attributes, which in a lot of matchups against MMA fighters or MMA strikers, I should say, that hole in his game kind of gets shored up because he has really good hand speed and he has stinging shots and a pretty long reach, 79 inches. That's some damn length to him. But this is a major problem if you're going out and taking on somebody like Carlos Ulberg, who comes from a kickboxing background, who trains with elite level kickboxers. Jamahal Hill is going to be a sitting duck for KO. I'm thinking that Carlos Ulberg is going to knock him out. So I will tell you, my early prediction here is going to be Carlos Ulberg knocking Jamahal Hill out in this fight. I can see it in the first round, but I could see it in the second. I could even see it in the third. And to be fair, if we did have this fight going distance, I think Alberg could put on a technical display and pick apart Jamahal Hill. On the contrary, for Jamahal Hill to win, he would have to be near perfect in a striking battle with somebody who was a pro striker in kickboxing, and he'd have to hit him with some absolutely devastating punches, which maybe a one-shot KO chance could potentially be there. But I think Carlos Ulberg has shown very good defensive skills, and on top of that, he doesn't gas himself going to the knockout finish like he did against Nzechukwu early in his UFC career. He's evolved substantially since then. Another factor, too, that I haven't even mentioned is the fact people are going to consider Jamahal Hill as the more experienced fighter. But in all actuality, if you think about it, Jamahal Hill is 12-2 in pro MMA. Carlos Ulberg is 10-1. There's not many more fights. And Ulberg has professional kickboxing bouts to go alongside of that. So realistically, he has more fight experience than Jamahal Hill, specifically in the stand-up. This is a very favorable matchup to Carlos Ulberg. This is a matchup that a kickboxer is going to salivate on because Jamahal Hill is very unlikely to be blasting double legs, taking Ulberg to the ground and controlling. He chose to kickbox with a two-division glory champion. He's going to be willing to strike with Carlos Ulberg, who was not to the level of an Alex Pereira in kickboxing, but still very talented striker. Both guys are 33 as well. Actually, Ulberg is 6 months older than Jamahal Hill, crazy enough. You'd think of him as like the young prospect on the come-up. I personally have a belief that Jamahal Hill has already peaked as a fighter. I really believe that. I think after his world title loss, in a sense, it's downhill from there. He tore his Achilles. That's a negative factor. Footwork was already questionable. I don't know what his recovery is set at this point. I don't know. There's a lot of I don't knows, but what I do know is Carlos Ulberg, even against the primed best version of Jamahal Hill, is a really difficult matchup for him. And I think that Jamahal might be making a massive career mistake with his willingness to accept a fight against Carlos Ulberg. Now, I think Carlos Ulberg is fairly popular amongst the fans, specifically like hardcore, as we all know him. The casuals are not as in tune with Carlos Ulberg. This is going to be, an opportunity for Ulberg to showcase himself, taking on Jamahal Hill, who's the former world champion, and I think has a bit more of the casual eyes. He's coming off UFC 300. So in all actuality, this is checkmate, perfect position, perfect option, perfect decision for Carlos Ulberg to emerge as the next title challenger. Yes, I'm going to go as far as to say Carlos Ulberg is probably going to be next in line with a win. Now, I know there's been talk of Prochazka fighting against Alex Pereira in a rematch, but if Carlos Ulberg can go out and put on a nice display against Jamahal Hill, come out of that fight without substantial injury, I believe another fast turnaround could be likely, and he could end up fighting Alex Pereira before the end of the year, because I think the UFC is not overly intrigued in doing a Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira fight. I think they are much more interested in giving Pereira striker versus striker matchups. That is why the option of exploring a Yuri Prochazka rematch is so exciting for the UFC, and maybe something they're actually going to push towards. But if Carlos Ulberg goes out, knocks Jamahal Hill unconscious, or even just beats him and comes out without substantial injury, or even if it's a close fight but he wins and he's able to turn around in a relatively quick amount of time, I think Carlos Ulberg is going to end up jumping the line. I would rather see Carlos Ulberg coming off a win against Jamahal Hill fight for the belt than a Prochazka rematch. And as much as people will say, oh, you're a hater, you're an asshole, what, you're skipping the Dagestani line, you're anti-Dagestan, I don't want to see Magomed Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira all that much. If you gave me an option of Ulberg versus Alex Pereira or Ankalaev versus Alex Pereira, I would choose Ulberg any day of the week. And on top of that, there's already a narrative we can sell because Carlos Ulberg is the lead training partner of Israel Adesanya, who has had a heated rivalry with Alex Pereira, not only from kickboxing, but to the UFC. And honestly, it's unfinished business, I think. So maybe Ulberg is going to carry the torch for Israel Adesanya and look to finish the show. This sounds like perfect. Like, this is all a master plan. I don't think the UFC could have written it better. Carlos Ulberg takes a short notice fight, beats Jamahal Hill, then takes on Alex Pereira for the belt, and may the best man win. It would be a tremendous matchup. It'd be something I'd be very excited to see, and I think it's a major pay-per-view because Alex Pereira is an absolute star. Even though Jamahal Hill was viciously knocked out by Alex Pereira, he's still going to have some name value on UFC 303 under Conor McGregor. They have a chance to sell Carlos Ulberg as the next big thing right here. So I think it's a marvelous option. I think that Carlos Ulberg stepping in on short notice is way better for the UFC than the Khalil Roundtree fight. I think this actually has been like a checkmate perfect situation. Like, you couldn't have written it better. I don't know, maybe the UFC intentionally tainted Khalil Roundtree's supplement just so they could jump Carlos Ulberg into the short notice spot and give him a chance to shine under Conor McGregor. Because if Ulberg gets a sensational knockout on a McGregor card, which is going to have massive amounts of casual eyes, I promise you, he is going to be getting a world title shot against Alex Pereira. So this matchup is extremely high stakes for Carlos Ulberg. For Jamahal Hill, obviously it is too, because a loss here would completely eliminate him from the title picture, and he'd probably be in a position where it'd be extremely hard to get back in the title picture. I personally love it. This is amazing. I think it's worked out better that we have Jamahal Hill fighting Carlos Ulberg. I like this matchup way more than the Roundtree fight. I think it's a worse matchup for Jamahal Hill. I know everybody kind of wrote him off against Roundtree. Personally, I was unsure. I thought Jamahal Hill may actually have had a chance to knock Khalil Roundtree out. We've seen Roundtree lose some fights against lower-tier striking opposition, whereas Carlos Ulberg's lone UFC loss came against Kennedy Nzechukwu, and to be honest, it was his own moment of lapse which cost him the fight by blitzing him like an absolute madman, and then the fight falling out of his hands because he was unable to get the knockout win. This is a checkmate situation. Carlos Ulberg, with a win, will be fighting for the UFC light heavyweight title before the end of the year. I promise you, and by God's grace, it'll happen because I believe. I'm Team Ulberg all the way through and through in this matchup. The pick is Ulberg. I want Ulberg to win. And Pereira versus Ulberg, especially in Ulberg, who gets a sensational knockout under the Conor McGregor card, is mainstay, powerful play, and he becomes a UFC star potentially with this. So I'm very excited. Now, the co-main event is awesome. I am super excited to see this fight. But the card as a whole, UFC 303, it's kind of trash. To be honest, it's kind of trash. The biggest fight outside of the main and co-main event, 40-year-old Cub Swanson versus Andre Fili. This is the truth. What the hell? They're really relying on the McGregor name at the top to sell the card, and the leftover hype from UFC 300 with Hill in the co-main to give it a little push, a little something, something. To be fair, there's still fun fights on the card. I'm not trying to shaft it completely. We have Charles Jourdain taking on Gian Silva. You have Vinicius Oliveira versus Ricky Simone. You have Joe Pyfer, Marc-Andre Barriault. Those are good fights. But the lack of ranked matchups makes this card pretty damn weak. They need another fight on the card, and I think they need Ian Garry on the card. Now, Ian Garry versus Michael Venom Page as the featured bout of the night would be a beautiful addition. Optimally, it would be Ian Garry taking on Colby Covington in a co-main event. That would be pretty great as well, but at this point, I don't think Colby's taking it. He's pretty much admitted to, fully ducking the fight, even though, he's trying to play tough guy and act like he isn't. He's ducking the fight. He doesn't want to fight Ian Garry. Ian Garry, MVP, featured bout of the night. Co-main event, Jamahal Hill, Carlos Ulberg. Main event, Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. That makes an amazing card. That makes a pay-per-view worth buying for the fans. And I hope that this all does come to fruition. We'll see how UFC 303 shapes up. I'm going to have high hopes and expectations, but regardless of how it shapes up, I know for a fact the damn co-main event, which was announced earlier today, is an absolute banger that I, for one, cannot wait to see. I'm picking Carlos Ulberg. I'm going to pick him by knockout. And this is the best career decision ever for him. And the UFC was so blessed that Khalil Roundtree popped for DHEA. Because if that wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have had this amazing option to give Carlos Ulberg a chance at being a UFC star. So amazing situation, amazing fight. I can't wait for any of it. Definitely let me know, guys. What do you think of the matchup? And what is your early prediction? Who do you think wins it? I want to know what my people are thinking. Make sure you guys smash the like button on your way out. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this early prediction reaction news video to this fight announcement. Hill versus Alberg, double thumbs up for me. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.